Now we're going to talk about another philosopher, that is Hippocrates. And maybe you have heard about Hippocrates in terms of medicine because he's the father of medicine, but I want that you remember that he proposed this idea, this hypothesis of Pangenesis. And I know that when you think about inheritance, you think about DNA, maybe you think about RNA, but all these ideas are less than 200 years old. So here, around this era time, Mendel he published his paper. Around here, we have the sequence of the DNA. So all these things are new, and for a long time, for more than 2,000 years, we didn't make a lot of progress. Actually, at this time, Darwin proposed his idea of natural selection, evolution through natural selection, and as a result of that, he said we need to have a theory of inheritance. We need to explain how inheritance takes place. So he took the ideas of Hippocrates and he brought them back and tried to explain inheritance using the ideas of Hippocrates. And more than saying I am right, is he brought that ideas to say let's start from zero and let's start thinking about this because we have forgot about this important idea. So let's recap to summarize everything that I just said to you. So I said to you that Hippocrates is the father of medicine. But I wanted you also remember because he proposed the hypothesis of the Pangenesis. And I also remind you that Darwin adopted a similar explanatory hypothesis long after, almost 2,000 years after, as I said here. But however, this theory was very general. It's a general theory, and there was no experimental evidence for this. And we will talk more in detail about that. And as I said, the idea of Darwin was not, I'm right. What he was trying to say is like, let's start thinking together about this because it's a very important point. And actually, this led to a lot of development, a lot of progress in the field of genetics. So Darwin is remembered because he was right about the theory of evolution through natural selection. And he's not very well remembered because about the theory of pangenesis, but he actually tried to produce progress in a different way in science, that he was trying to say, let's think about this question, and even I'm wrong, I propose this hypothesis. That is something important. In this slide, I'm going to talk about the theory of the Pangenesis, and I'm going to talk about, so I just talked about Pythagoras, and if you remember, we talk about vapors, and then we talk about the likeness factor. Now, when we talk about Hippocrates, we're going to talk about particles, and these particles are going to be called humors. And I'm sure that you know that males and females, they have two cells that are gametes, and those gametes they join to form the zygote. However, at that time there was no microscopes, there was no scientific method, so we didn't know about that. What we knew is that the offspring, or what they thought is that the offspring resembled the parent because, and they thought about that there was particles in the semen, that they were incubated that in the female, and this is how its offspring took place. So they thought that every part of the body, the head, for example, the shoulder, all of them, there was a mix of body fluids, and all these particles went into the semen. The mechanism of inheritance rely on these particles. So while the female will incubate these particles, then the kid will look like the parent because he will have the same particles. So again, if the parent has this hair that looks like this, the kid will have also hair look like this because the kid will have the same particles in his body, and he will also inherit those particles later. So to summarize, from every part of the body are produced some particles that are called humors. So this was the first thing that Hippocrates thought, and those particles were a mix of body fluids that are carried by them to the testicles, as shown in this schematic. And finally, that in that way they explain why the offspring resemble to their parents. And there was something very interesting about the ideas of pangenesis that are still under debate now. That he proposed that, okay, we have these particles here, but what about what happened with the experience that happened during your lifetime? So, for example, if you become very muscular, are you going to inherit that to your kid? So this kid will have super muscles. And what about if he loses an eye? Yeah, so you will lose that particle. And he said yes. So so you will inherit the normal and the diseases that you acquire during your lifetime. So it was very interesting that perspective because they form and shape also the ideas of Darwin about inheritance. So remember, humors could be altered during their lifetime, as I explained with the example of the eye and the muscles of the kid, that he will not have an eye and he will be very muscular. And so diseases or normal traits will be drawn from various parts of the body and they will be passed to the offspring, as it happened to this this kid here. And finally, the pangenesis theory was very important because they influenced the early ideas of Darwin about inheritance.